Let me suggest we start off because we have a tight schedule with a panel of absolutely superlative speakers. I'm not going to take a lot of time or actually any time to introduce the speakers because I think they are all highly visible people. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with Mr. Paranjpe, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Unilever. You all know Unilever, so that doesn't require any introduction. Then after that, we'll have two other speakers. I can see that Michiel has already joined us. He's the CEO of Enviu, which is a Netherlands-based NGO. And interestingly, there are projects that Unilever and Enviu are doing together. So there's a connection there as well. And then we'll have Mahindra and Mr. Ghosh from Mahindra and Mahindra joining in. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer of Mahindra. Mahindra is a Indian multinational with its operations spread between utility and sports utility vehicles on one side to tractors and farm equipment, and then an IT-based business, 15 to 20 billion US dollars. So we're going to start off with Paranjpe. He's going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have 10, 15 minutes for Q&A before we move on to the next speaker. So Nitin, once again, many, many thanks for taking the time to be with us today and speak to all of us. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Amitava. Thank you, Arun, for inviting me, and delighted to share the next 90 minutes with Anirban and Michiel. So, and thank you all for joining in and listening into this. Now, where do I start my story? The day I joined this company, on the 1st of June, 1987, a date before probably most of you, if not all of you, were even born. Yeah, I walked across and joined the Indian subsidiary of Unilever, starry-eyed, absolutely delighted that I had the opportunity to work for them. And frankly, at that stage, what did I know of them? Little other than the fact that they were a highly respected, iconic company. Most people might have given an arm and a leg to join them, and I had the opportunity. That's all that I knew, and that's why I was so grateful for being there. Little did I know that almost 34 years later, I would still be there. I joined that company because of what I described. It was just an iconic, respected organization, but I stayed there for something else. I stayed there because very quickly I saw and I felt and I experienced a certain philosophy of doing business, a certain belief system of wanting to do well by doing good, as we called it in those days. And that appealed to me. Something about this philosophy and the totality of its values resonated so strongly with me that over 30 years later, I'm still there. Now, while I've said that doing well by doing good was a part of the DNA of this organization, which appealed to me, something quite genuinely transformational happened for the organization and for me, and how I felt about it in 2009. In 2009, the company announced and shared what was then called the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. I remember the day when it was announced. I remember the group I was in and how we all felt. Hearing what had just been announced, which were probably the most inspiring and the boldest articulation that I had heard of, and I could ever imagine any company making, of certain goals, a certain commitment, a desire to decouple the growth of the company from the adverse environmental impact and recouple the company with positive social good. That's what the heart of the USLP was. And it wasn't at a high level. There were some very significant commitments that we had made in terms of what we would like to deliver publicly. Now, I remember how we felt. Our hearts swelled with pride. We were blown away that a company like this could state all of this. We had not the foggiest idea how we were going to get there. Yeah, that's how I felt. And while we were excited, inspired, and scared, all in equal measure, when we heard all of this, there was yet another line in what we had then called our compass, which was, to my mind, probably the most profound thing that was said there. There was a line which said that our first responsibility is to our consumers, then customers, suppliers, employees, and our communities. When we fulfill these responsibilities well, our shareholders will be rewarded. That's what it said. Now you can take this line as just a line, a throwaway line, or as I reflected on it, it seemed to me the most profound philosophy and a fundamental philosophy of doing business, very different from what had been taught to me when I was in business school. I'd been taught that the purpose of business was shareholder wealth maximization, and that's all that business needs to do. And what this was really fundamentally questioning whether that was right. And in many ways, as I reflected over it, I came to the conclusion that the purpose of business is not shareholder wealth maximization. The purpose of business has been and continues to be to address the issues facing society at that point in time. If you do a good job at this, society rewards you. And the rewards of addressing societal issues, needs, consumer wants, whatever you call it, is the profit that you get. And that's how shareholder wealth gets created. Over decades, I feel we have gone wrong between understanding what the purpose is and what the outcome is. The purpose of business is to address societal needs, and the outcome of being honest and doing this with integrity is the shareholder wealth maximization that we get. And understanding this difference is important. When we get that wrong, our social contract with society gets broken. And that's why business over the last many years has earned itself a bad name. Lots of people see business and business leaders as self-serving. So that's really what happened. Now, inspiring as all of this was, profound as it was intellectually in terms of us thinking about it, translating what we had said was not easy. It wasn't easy because very quickly after the initial excitement died down, we realized it was hard. And to be honest, in the organization in the early days, there were people who were, as you would expect, skeptics. Is this the role of business? Should this we be doing? Are we getting soft? Etc., etc. But most people were believers. They wanted it to be true. But being a believer wasn't enough. You could be a believer and yet not know how you would find a way to find ideas which were good for society and the planet and good for business at the same time. Because let's face it, we had this idea of what we wanted to do, but we were not an NGO. It was not okay. It was not okay for us to find ideas which were great for the planet, great for society, but were not good for business. There's nothing wrong with those ideas, by the way, but they are wrong if you run it in a commercial organization. If that's what is your sole passion and purpose, you should be with one of those organizations. But equally, we were also clear that we are not a mercenary organization where we didn't care about any of these things. So we had to find a way to operate in an intersection set between good for business and good for society. And that intersection set at that point in time was not large, it was small. And therefore it was hard, it was intellectually challenging, and it took us a long period of time to find ideas which worked there. And I would be honest to say that even today, I don't think we found answers for everything, but we are much progressed in terms of where we were. 10 years in, we quickly realized that while we had set those big goals, frankly, while they were audacious and we didn't have a clue, the fact that we had put our stake in the ground, The fact that we were committed and so badly wanted those outcomes, stimulated and got innovative solutions, the nature of partnerships, collaboration, etc. And we achieved a lot. We achieved a lot more than what we would have achieved had we not put our stake in the ground and made those bold commitments. But equally, we realized we didn't achieve several of our goals. And one of the things as we work in this space is the willingness to be uncomfortable with setting goals for which you don't have an idea how you're going to get there. Recognize that it will take you much further than you ever would have been, but also recognize that there will be areas where you will not get to that goal. The biggest, if I was to say the biggest success of that sustainable living plan, if I were to call it that, is that 10 years later, our conviction about this belief and this philosophy is only stronger. That, to my mind, is the strongest endorsement I can make. And therefore, at the end of 2020, when we had to announce what happens next, because the USLP had a set of time-bound goals between 2010 and 2020, we announced our next compass, as we called it. And the compass that we've announced now with a set of goals, I think is even bolder, as indeed it should be, because the world today is different from what it was in 2010. The expectations of business are different today than what they were in 2010. And so today, instead of simply saying we will do no harm, I think we want to move to the stage where we will do positive good. That's a massive shift. And we want it to be balanced across the environment and the social agenda that we see. I think we've reached a stage where we've now found a way to articulate a business strategy through this lens. All our business leaders are convinced that the pursuit of this approach will be their point of difference, will help them win, and will give them relevance into the years and decades to come. The business case for sustainability for us has never been clearer. We see this through 4 lenses. We hold ourselves to account. Anything that we do must either be obviously driving growth, it should reduce cost, it should de-risk our business, or enhance trust. These are the 4 dimensions through which we see things: growth, cost, trust, and risk. And across, we see plenty of evidence to show that consumers want it. People, they gravitate towards brands and companies which are more purposeful. In fact, the younger the generation, the more the trend is. Customers like it. Society is demanding for it. And investors get it. Anyone who tells you that investors don't get it is living on a different planet today. The amount of funds which are moving into ESG investing is growing. But you know what? We put up a climate transition action plan for a shareholder vote recently, and it got overwhelming, on 98% plus votes in favor of that. These are our investors. So I think the time has come when, if I was to use a phrase that we would use in India, and believers, the planetary conditions are just right for us to pursue this, and things are coming in place. So that's where I find ourselves at this moment. Now, all of what we've said, this multi-stakeholder model that we are pursuing, is founded on 3 beliefs in this company. The first is that brands with purpose will grow. There's no question. Second, that people with purpose thrive. So we are all out in terms of giving our people meaning, and we've discovered and seen time and time again that if you found someone who only saw his or her job as simply selling soap or soup, there's a certain type of energy which you bring. But when the job is infused with a different meaning, a larger purpose in terms of what you're after, you bring in a completely different discretionary energy and commitment to the task. Because people seek meaning in their work and a larger purpose to what they are. So people with purpose thrive. And finally, companies with purpose last. There is no question in our mind. If there is no, and purpose and what it means to be purposeful will change over time. It was different 100 years ago, it is different today, and it will be different 100 years from now. But that's what companies need to do to stay relevant in the changing times. So that's where we are. I'm now going to I've spent about 15 minutes talking about the context where we are. I now want to spend the next 10 or 15 minutes talking about some examples, because all of you are now focused on looking at interventions and initiatives and how can you make this work, especially in the context of the bottom of the pyramid. Now, it is entirely true that probably the two most significant issues facing the world are climate change, which everybody understands, but probably as significant, if not more, is social inequality. Why? The statistics are quite clear. Take inequality through any lens. You take the lens of underprivileged, discriminated, underrepresented groups, racial, ethnic, etc. It is stark. Unemployment levels in such groups are twice the unemployment levels in the mainstream groups. Wealth, if you take United States, the median wealth of an African American home is 1/10 the median wealth of a white American home. If you take it through income, I think all the statistics are clear that 1% of the world has more wealth than the balance 99. That 8 individuals earn more money than 3.5 billion people. That it will probably take us the next 100 years and a 15-fold increase in GDP, 15-fold increase in GDP before everyone in the world gets to the poverty line and just above the poverty line described by the World Bank, defined by the World Bank. These are staggering statistics. And therefore, if we are not sensitive to this, if we are not addressing this, we will see social strife. We will see strife of the sorts that we haven't seen before. Black Lives Matter in the US was not a one-off phenomenon. There are events like that which took place in 4,600 cities across the world. And this is not about Black lives. This is about sections of society through different lenses that you can take, whether it is gender, whether it is race, ethnicity, income, caste, creed, religion. You can take any cut, but there are sections which feel that the larger system is simply not working for them. That is the issue. That's what we have to solve for. And our belief simply is that you cannot have a successful business in a failing society. Therefore, we have to address it. Now, what have we done? There are many things that we've committed as a part of our compass, including commitments like living wage that we will deliver to everyone who offers us goods or services by 2030. We've committed to skilling, reskilling, not just internally, but externally. So lots of things. But I want to now talk about 4 specific interventions. Now, interventions which cut across the supply side and the demand side. So first, and as you hear these interventions, you will notice that they all address the bottom of the pyramid. But as you start addressing one aspect, you would see the impact of it across many areas. It is around livelihoods. It is around self-worth and self-esteem. It is around climate change and other issues. All of these can start getting addressed and have potential business benefits. So let's take the simplest one, which some of you may have heard, something which we started in India 15 years ago, which was a Shakti program, where we essentially, at the heart of it, what did we do? We went to the most marginalized sections of society. Women of weaker caste went to the most remote areas, provided them training, and provided them a means of increasing their livelihood by allowing them to distribute our products and earn some distribution commission. In doing so, we've increased their livelihood, gave them self-esteem and self-worth and dignity. But most important, or just as importantly, we got preferential access and distribution in parts of the country where we could not have reached. It grew our business as it made a difference to society. Everything that I talk about, you should now see in this lens, because we want to work in this intersection set. We took this idea and we took it to Cambodia. Today, we run it in Cambodia under what we call Apsara. It's a country where 80% of the people live in villages, no jobs there, massive migration, almost 2 million people looking to move to urban centers. And we moving away from their families. And what did we do? We did the same thing. We took women out there, provided them training, provided them a means of getting income by distributing our products. We've made a difference now to over 10,000 women already, and a business impact for us over $40 million has been the positive business impact, improved market shares in geographies where we have access with these Apsara ladies out there. So that's the first example I wanted to talk about. The second one, I want to take a subject which is probably the most emotive subject at this moment when it comes to climate. You see, as a consumer, people don't understand greenhouse warming. They don't understand the 1.5 degrees that the world wants to work towards. But the one thing that they do understand is the nuisance that plastic is creating in our lives. Plastic is a live issue. It is not an issue in the developed world. It is an issue in the developed world and the developing world. People get it. They see this litter on the streets, in our rivers, in our oceans. Governments are getting active around it. There is regulation coming in, and this is a big risk. But the truth is, there is nothing wrong with plastic as a material, as long as it stays in the economy. The issue is when it gets into nature. So what are we doing? We have made commitments around plastic and its recycling. That we've done. We've committed to having 100% of our products having, which will be recyclable, or using recycled material, reusable material, and compostable. We've committed to reducing virgin plastic by 25%. We've committed to having recycled material, which we are going to have in our products. But doing all of this is not easy, because in many countries, the recycling infrastructure simply does not exist. And consumers do not have the education to drive segregation of plastic, which helps this infrastructure and helps this going forward. So we've had initiatives in 2 areas. In South Africa, we've started an initiative, and all of the 2 initiatives that I talk about in South Africa and in Indonesia are looking to achieve 2 things. First, we want to work with the informal system out there to step up recycling, to create a secondary market for recycled material. We need to have adequate supply first, and we need to improve the quality of that supply by driving quality of segregation. Because if you don't have good quality segregation, you have poor yields. You're not able to get the right quality of recycled material. It doesn't get, and that becomes a big problem. The third thing that we want to demonstrate through all of these interventions is probably a little defensive action, but many governments are imposing what is called an extended producer liability or responsibility taxes. They're basically litter taxes. And they're saying to companies that you're putting so much plastic out into the environment, we're going to tax you for it. And the only way we can avoid the tax if we demonstrate to the government that we are not a part of the problem, we are part of the solution. And that's why we've committed to collect more plastic than we sell. So what have we done in South Africa? In South Africa, we've got an initiative where we are partnering with the African Reclaimers Organization. There are over 90,000 people, and we want to organize them, we want to integrate them, and we want to provide them both dignity and improve their livelihoods. We want them to benefit and rechannelize the extended producer responsibility money that the government collects and make sure that this goes towards improving the livelihood of these people. In doing so, we increase collection. If we increase collection, rates of recycled plastic start coming down. I don't know how many of you know, strange as it might sound, recycled material in many geographies is more expensive than virgin material. Now, what is the motivation for having systemic change and having a large number of companies using recycled material if actually that starts costing you more? And the reason it costs you more is simply because there's not enough supply. We are not collecting enough, and the yields are poor because segregation is not of good quality. That's what we are here to solve. We then work with consumers and we drive awareness in consumers about quality of segregation, thereby improving both quality and quantity, and over a period of time, reducing the rates and reducing and driving the systemic change we want. In Indonesia, we decided to take a slightly different approach, a different experiment going on there. In Indonesia, we've created what we call waste banks. Just like in a bank, you put in money and you get some interest. Here, what we are saying is we've created waste banks across the country, and we are encouraging consumers to bring their plastic waste and deposit it there. And just like in a bank, you get some interest in that, we are providing people what we call waste credit. That waste credit can be redeemed against some of our products which they use and they buy. Thereby, it's almost like a loyalty scheme. And you can bring back any waste. It doesn't have to be our products. Just bring back anything. We provide you waste credit. That credit can be deployed. That's an idea. We've started now partnering with technologies companies. We are partnering with Google out there to provide visibility and drive awareness of this program and encourage more and more people to both start segregating and collecting waste. This is so important. Indonesia generates 25,000 tons of waste every day. Over 80% of that is unsegregated. And that's why this intervention became so crucial. Now, let me share with you probably the last story that I wanted to share, which gives you another perspective of the sort of interventions that we can carry out to address the bottom of the pyramid. And this is about sourcing. As you're aware, we are committed to ensuring that 100% of what we source in some of our key agricultural material is going to come from sustainable sources. You would also be aware that we are committed to 100% deforestation-free supply chain by 2023. These are big commitments that we've made. Palm oil is a very significant ingredient that we buy. And we all know the challenges associated with palm oil. Almost half of the palm oil which we buy comes from Indonesia. Almost a little over, less than half, but over 40% of the land under cultivation is with smallhold farmers. And despite well over 40% of the land being with smallhold farmers, the yields from there are under 30%. So the yields are much lower than what you would get elsewhere. And that's understandable because some of their practices are not sustainable, neither are they productive. They have many challenges. Their practices are poor, which I described, but they also lack access to finance. They'll finance for replanting, finance to get certification. And in the absence of that, they do not have as good an access to global supply chains as is required, and therefore they get poor. They get poor returns for whatever they produce. So combination of poor yields, poor returns, as a result of all of this causes an issue. And this prevents us from getting to the sort of supply chain that we want. So we've started working with smallhold farmers, with an implementation agency on the ground in Sumatra, trying to address these three issues. When we are able to address these three issues, we would not just have made a difference to the lives of these people, but we would fundamentally drive a transformation, not just for us, but a systemic transformation that would take place. The reason we've chosen palm oil is because we are a relatively large player in this supply chain. And by virtue of being a material player in the supply chain, interventions that we make will not just impact us, but will have a wider impact on the totality of the ecosystem that we are dealing with. I hope I've given you a sense of the sorts of interventions that we are making. Several of these have immediate payback that we get as a business. Some others are likely to have a payback over a period of time. And yet it is something that we need to do, because when we sort this out, we will have the benefit of a secure supply chain for a key ingredient of ours at rates which are reasonable and in a way which is highly responsible, while making a difference to people, of course. So that's the general thinking. I'm now going to wrap up. I'm going to wrap up by reminding all of you what I started off saying. I genuinely believe, I really do, that even 10 years, what we've seen over the last 10 years, the demands on corporates by society have undergone a significant change. I think the pace will only intensify. I believe a time will come, not in the too distant future, when business will simply not be left with a choice of following any business strategy if it is not overtly socially responsible. We simply will not have a choice. Today, you do have a choice. Today, you could get away with it, but you will not be able to get away with it in the future. And the question for everyone is, are you the people who will do things after the whole world has recognized it and when it becomes not an option? Or are you the people who do what leaders do? Leaders have the capacity to see what's going to happen sometime into the reasonable future and have the capacity to act when people are saying why, not when they start saying why not and how come you aren't doing this. I think that time is actually past. People are already beginning to say, why aren't you doing all of this? But if for those who haven't seen it, that day will come very, very soon. So my ask and my hope of each one of you is that you, as future leaders, take this on, embrace this, recognize that it won't be easy, but also recognize that this is the only way we will be true to the inherent role of business, which is to address the societal issues facing society at that point in time. That's how we remain relevant. That's our purpose. When we do a good job, we will be rewarded. And that's the outcome. And address this misconception and this mistake that we've made between what purpose is and what outcomes are. That's my hope of each one of you. Thank you all. I'm happy to take any questions and comments.
Questions? Maybe if you write them in the chat and I could read them out and make it that way. Yep. Go ahead.
Can you also talk about the failed social responsibility projects?
Sorry, could you, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you clearly.
Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Hello?
please.
Can you also talk about some failed social responsibility projects?
Failed, the ones which didn't work. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, and what the biggest reason of their failure was?
You know, several of these initiatives that I've talked about, we've been trying for a while. And the central reason that they don't work is when we don't get the two things. When we are not able to craft a win-win-win model for everyone. If we are not able to articulate what's the value for the company. So for example, if we drove, or let me put it differently, our interventions in plastic that I talked about, we've been trying to do for several years. They did not work. They did not work because we were not able to translate the benefit that we would deliver to the bottom of the pyramid in terms of benefit that we would accrue to us. The time has changed today. Today, it is possible for me to articulate brand propositions which are around my packaging being using recycled material, whether it is, and articulate propositions where consumers are willing to choose offerings from brands which have aspects of sustainability which are built into it. Now, this doesn't give us a license to charge more today or have a performance penalty that the consumer has to bear. But when we are able to when we are able to solve for this trinity of performance, price, and sustainability, that's when we get magic. And several areas, solving for these three is not easy. One example that we've been trying for several years and have not succeeded is this whole area of dispensing solutions and refilling. It is my belief that it should be possible for us to have large dispensing stations in retail outlets. Why should I pack small bottles of shampoo or detergent, etc., where the amount of packaging is just simply too significant? What could happen if I'm able to run such refillery stations in large retail outlets? In fact, I see many benefits. I see the opportunity to have last mile differentiation. I can mix certain ingredients at the last mile and customize that offering for you. Hopefully get you to see the benefit of all of that. This has been an idea that we've been trying for the last 10 years. Yeah. But we have struggled to scale this idea. It is a massive idea if we can solve for it and demonstrate it. What is the issue? The issue is, as we solve for this, there are challenges in our supply chain. But most importantly, there are challenges with respect to consumers and getting them to bring back the bottle every time. And how much discount do we have to offer the consumer to make it motivating for the consumer to do this? When we offer that sort of benefit to the consumer, then the rest of the economics in this value chain are not working out today. So getting this balance and getting the economic model right for all relevant people is probably the hardest thing that is required to be done. So as you guys work on projects, if you can solve for the one idea that I've talked about just now and give it scale, I would be delighted. By the way, and we continue to work on it. We haven't given up. At this moment, we have a large project going on in the UK, working with ASDA and seeing whether in today's environment, with a much more conscious consumer, are we able to make the economics work?
Need, you want to ask your question?
Yes. Can I just speak here?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Nitin, for your presentation. And I think I can relate very much to your presentation because I'm also from FMCG sector. But there's one problem that I always had to face during my time there was how to manage the trade-offs between, the environmental and social impact versus the pressure of delivering the P&L, right? Especially in developing country where consumers don't really, or not yet care much about the social impact, etc., like consumers in more developed nations. For example, one of the biggest segments that I've served, and I think it's the same for Unilever as well, was rural consumers. They are low income, and usually for this target, right, we need to find a model that is low cost and low price to serve this segment. And that means that sometimes we need to, certain things that work like sachet pouch that create a small pouch to serve Indonesian market, or like the palm oil. I know it's harming the environment, etc. But then it's also bring down the cost of goods sold for your product and delivering the P&L. And in those situations, do you have an advice for us how to manage this trade-off?
So firstly, I understand the question, by the way. It's a question I get asked every time. Yeah. I'm going to try and reframe this in some ways. So allow me to do that. I don't particularly like the word trade-off. I like the word, how do we balance? And I'll explain why. Yeah. The moment we start thinking about balancing short-term and long-term, that's not a new challenge for sustainability. Business leaders balance the short term and the long term in many different dimensions all the time. Yeah. This is not a subject which is, this is not something which is true only for sustainability interventions. Point number one. Point number two, for anyone who says to me that they are so concerned about the short term that they don't have the space to do anything for the long term. I'll give you an idea which could probably improve your bottom line by 100, 200, 300, maybe 400 basis points this year, depending on which industry you are in, maybe even more, with zero impact on your top line, with zero impact. Now, many of you would be wondering, what sort of an idea is this? And if it is so straightforward, why won't everyone do it? And I'll tell you the idea. All you need to do is to stop investing in R&D this year. What do you think will happen? Your bottom line, if you're in the pharma industry, will grow up massively, in some other industries by 100, 200 basis points. Massive improvement in your bottom line this year. What do you think will happen to the business? And what do you think will happen to your share price? Your share price will collapse. The reason the share price collapses because investors understand that a company which does not invest in R&D this year has no future. And we all know that the largest component of your share price is not this year's earning, but it is the future cash flows, the assumptions of future cash flows. So business leaders are investing in the short term today, for returns that are going to happen into the future. We are doing it today, aren't we? So if we are doing it today, because we understand this, the thing that we need to understand is the day will come when investors will be asking us, what are you investing for sustainability? If you're not investing for sustainability, you won't have a future. And therefore, if you are not doing enough today to protect your future, you will get penalized. Just like today, if you don't spend in R&D, you get penalized. If you don't spend on brand support and you increase your margins this month or this quarter by reducing that, you get penalized by investors because investors have become aware. I think the day with sustainability will also come soon. That's, I think, message number one. So therefore, like we balance in other areas, we have to balance this. And I use the word balance because if it was a free hand, maybe we would have, as Unilever as well, we would have wanted to invest a lot more in 2021. But we can't do everything in 21. So we decide how much we can afford in 21 and how much in 22 and how much in 23. So we phase things out at all points, looking to strike this balance rather than think of trade-off. There is no trade-off. We believe this is a driver of our performance. Trade-off suggests it is one against the other. It's not one against the other. That's message one. Then you come to emerging markets. I do not believe that in emerging markets, people don't care. And I also feel that there are ways by which we can solve the emerging market needs while addressing all the points that you talked about around cost and yet do things which are sustainable. Let's take the case of India. And I think you use sachets as a great example. Sachets make a massive difference. They lower the price point, but there is a problem because they can cause litter in our streets, in our oceans, in our rivers. That's an issue, but they make a difference to the people. What have we, by the end of 2021 in India, the Indian company will have found a way to collect more plastics than we put into the market. That's what we would have managed to do. So we are not walking away from the consumer opportunity. We would have found a way to solve for it. That's point number one. Point number two, there are many interventions that we make in sustainability which actually save money. When you use less water, less electricity, when you reduce waste, when you find packaging which can be recycled and recyclable, you're not spending more money, you're saving money. Less of something cannot be more costly. So while some interventions are expensive, like when we invest in sustainable agriculture and we are training people and the payback will be over 2, 3, 4 years of time, there are many interventions which we can make which have an immediate payback. Our challenge for all of us is to find the appropriate solution for that market because the conditions are different in different places. I don't know whether it answers your question. And by the way, it is not easy. So I would be the first to say that we don't have answers for everything.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nitin, for your talk. Thank you for the 2 questions. I know there's still another hand up, but we need to manage the time so that we can hear from the other two speakers. So let me invite our next speaker, Mr. Anirban Ghosh. Anirban, if you can turn on your video. Hello there. So Mr. Ghosh, as I mentioned at the outset, is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Mahindra and Mahindra, which is an Indian multinational. And he's been leading some very interesting work in India. So Anirban, without further ado, thank you for coming to this session today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor. In the course of this course, you've discussed poverty, you've discussed the underserved extensively. Poverty, underserved, these words tend to go together. Even after the epiphany that there is a fortune lying at the bottom of the pyramid, the epiphany did lead to a scramble for fortune, much like the gold rush many years ago. And just like the gold rush, the scramble led to a lot of heartburn and some serendipitous well-being. The successes mostly came when companies induced consumption by reducing pack size, offering single-serve packs instead of jars and bottles, and you were just discussing the impact of this innovation a little while ago. In the realm of machinery, like tractors, cooling solutions, even cars, relative to the dreams of the organizations that launched the products, the smaller products, the failures were close to being spectacular, as it usually is in the innovation ecosystem. In the process, the new innovative products found users who were not originally targeted and uses that were not originally considered. So even if the products didn't entirely die out, which sometimes they did, they were not the statues of liberation that they were touted to be. And so not a single small tractor, not a single small cooler, and not a single small car was sold in the 32 villages that we will talk about in these 15 minutes. After all, it is not easy to induce consumption amongst folks who earn the equivalent of 12 cents per capita per day. And I'm not even getting into the lumpy flow of this revenue stream for now. You might even ask, how do these folks survive on this kind of income? As it turns out, accommodation is basic and free, food costs are minimal, education, by and large, they grow their own food, education is free when available, health services almost non-existent, so no expenditure, and there are no coffee shops to splurge their daily cents in. Problem is, there isn't enough of anything that they really need, and rarely is the standard of whatever is available better than basic. If you have had the opportunity to see the short film while preparing for this class, you won't be surprised to know that water was easily available for only 7 months in a year in these 32 villages. 48% of the population depended on manual labor to earn money. 25% of the population migrated to earn a living. 61% of the farmers had less than 2 acres of land. 93% of the people lived in houses made of local stone and or mud, and 54% were illiterate. And these were not even the poorest villages in the country. It is not as if efforts had not been made to improve the lot of the 20,000 people who lived in these 32 villages. But the efforts, as you can guess, were less than successful. While we can discuss many reasons why this was so, one major learning stood out from the CSR experience lens. Organizations and governments came, sympathized, maybe even felt pity, and donated products, provided services, and built infrastructure which they thought human beings must have. A toilet, for instance. For who in their right mind would practice open defecation when a toilet was available? As it turned out, the toilets that had a proper roof became storage spaces, and those that did not soon looked like ruins from an ancient era. The well-meaning organizations were left scratching their heads and telling tales in conferences around the world. The villagers continued with their lives after the benefactors had left. In their own need hierarchy, toilets came way down the list. The dominant need was greater water availability. Most of their struggles was about dealing with this one major problem, which is why the Indian government in general and the state of Madhya Pradesh in particular had started a massive integrated watershed development program, leveraging the learning from implementation experience of such programs over the past 30 odd years. Now, it isn't easy for a corporation, any corporation, however well-meaning, to waltz into this environment and do what is evident must be done. This is a situation created by the passage of many charlatan-like characters through the villages who have promised much and delivered little. The folks had come to believe that everybody who came to them had some nefarious ulterior motive, and that if anything was being provided to the villagers, it should be provided for free. The common question I would encounter when visiting these villages was, will you come back? And it was a very eye-opening question, because it kind of told you that they were not with you even as you were telling them the lovely stories about the things that you wanted to do. And so began a long and arduous journey of building faith through extensive conversation and small projects. Something development sector professionals call community mobilization through entry point projects. These projects are seemingly simple in nature, but address the issues that the villagers think they have at that time. Build connect between the benefactor and the beneficiaries, and lay the ground for larger, more impactful interventions later. I remember many villages wanting a boundary wall around their schools, some wanting a covered crematorium, and some others wanting a cemented road that would not become a mud path during the rainy season. The villagers gauged the real intent of the benefactor as these projects were being implemented. They would simply look to see if the organization was using materials as required, being fair in awarding work to people, and not indulging in corruption. Once they had sussed out the benefactor organization on these parameters, the going was either smooth or rocky, depending on what the organization had done. A lot of water was done to harness water, a lot of work was done to harness water in these villages, pardon me. A lot of work was done to use better seeds, increase irrigation, use better farming practices, improve agricultural productivity, and increase household income. But perhaps what made the work most impactful was the work done to empower women and help them set up small businesses and add to the household income. In the film that you may have seen called Samriddhi Ki Asha, or Hope for Prosperity, you may have noticed that a little girl said that she wanted to become a police person, and her father quickly said that she wouldn't be able to become one, and both parents went on to explain why. As the project came to a close, the same child wanted to become a doctor, and the same parents discussed how they would make it happen. This is the change that happened in the course of the project. You can see all the details of what was done and the impact it had in the sequel to the film you've seen. The sequel is called Samriddhi Ki Subah, which in English means the dawn of prosperity. Let me just mention that the project had addressed the water issue in large measure and more than tripled per capita income. People had moved up Maslow's hierarchy and were ready to solve other problems, including sanitation and hygiene. But let's talk about why enabling all this made sense for the Mahindra business. First, the ethos of RISE. If you look at our brand purpose, you will see that it is articulated as enabling stakeholders to rise. Now, why would you want to enable stakeholders to rise? I think Nitin explained the purpose of business very well. And in his explanation of the purpose of business, you can see why RISE is such a fantastic brand ethos to have. From the example that we discussed, when people's income went from one level to something that was 3.5 times higher, it opened up their ability to live lives better, to consume products or consume services in a way that they could live lives better. And there could be no better reason for an organization to enable RISE and have RISE in its brand ethos. So that's the first reason why this made sense. Second, the primary driver of demand for our tractor business is water availability. Whenever farmers have water and can grow their crop well, they buy more tractors. Whenever there isn't water, they can't buy tractors. So from a simple driver of demand perspective, enabling availability of water made complete sense for a business like ours. In fact, it's not only about tractors. As a rural community becomes more prosperous, they start buying pickup trucks and various other products, some of which are made by our organization and many which are made by other organizations. Third, if you think this is only about doing good, let me tell you about return on investment. Now, when you are investing money in social projects, there is a metric called social return on investment. In this particular project, the money invested was not only from Mahindra, but it was also from the government. The return on the money that we invested together is about 17 times higher than the money invested. You don't get returns like this in a company, but you do get returns like this if you invest properly in social development. 17 times higher than the money invested over a period of 10 years. In fact, if I look at it purely selfishly from a business perspective, as the community rose, earned more money and consumed some of our products, such as tractors, pickup trucks, seeds, biopesticides, and so on, a little spreadsheet work revealed that using a 10% discount rate, our investment would be NPV positive over a 10-year span. And this is when nobody really wants any returns from CSR investments or money from the CSR budget. But if we really want to make impact at a large scale, CSR money is very limited. It needs to be leveraged with additional capital, either from the government or from other organizations, and only then can you scale all this up. And of course, by this time, both from Nitin's conversation and what I related to you, we probably don't have to emphasize anymore that doing good is the way to sustainable profit. Now, if these are the reasons why we went ahead and did this, what are the key things that make projects like this successful? The first thing is to help people solve their own problems. And I suspect as you go out and do your field visits, even if it is virtually, you will discover that wherever people have been helped to solve their own problems, they've done very well. If you empower them to solve their own problems and not do it for them, it's even better. Using CSR capital to catalyze more capital to achieve scale makes these projects successful, but most importantly, being honest and fair gains the trust of people who have often been led up the garden path. Let me close by saying it doesn't take much to cause transformation. At the end of the day, by 3.5 times increase in per capita income, where had the people reached? They'd gone from 12 cents to about 40 cents. 40 cents again per day per capita is really not much money, but it was enough to trigger transition in that community. Today's conversation, or this last 15 minutes, was about CSR capital to trigger business through social development, but the principles remain the same for any kind of capital. And I'm glad Nitin went ahead of me and explained the purpose of business so very well. So whether you are using business capital or CSR capital, you are addressing the core purpose of business. Let me stop here.
We'll hold off on questions. I'd like Michiel to speak to us, and then we will have questions for both Anirban and Michiel together. Michiel, if you can turn on your...
Yeah,
So,
good morning, good afternoon, good evening, something. Well, after so thank you for inviting me, Anna, to close this and finalize on these two great speakers. I do think it's interesting because I come from quite a different place, not being a corporate or a business, but actually a business growing businesses. If it would be okay, I would like to use some slides to guide you through what we do. If that's okay, Amitava?
yes, please go ahead, share your screen.
Then I'll share my screen. That's this one. So, as I said, I think we're a little bit the odd one out here today. But, hopefully can add a bit of perspective from our side to this conversation. So what we do is we are a relatively small company, and we build companies with the intention to change the world. That's it. So Enviu was founded in 2004, and I think I can fully relate to how Nitin formulated it. Our core mission is to drive an economy that serves people and planet, right? So it's about the classic 3 Ps, as they teach me while I was in college: people, planet, and profit. Be in balance. It's about an economy sort of enriching all instead of just benefiting shareholders. So that was our main drive and mission, and is our main drive and mission from the moment Enviu was founded. And our belief is that this should go through business. So we are in a world with a lot of NGOs and a lot of grant money and charities, CSR and stuff like that. But in the end, business should be the driver of this to make it long-lasting and sustainable. So I very much relate to everything that has been said before, because in the end, if you want to have that change, markets should drive and be built on a fundamental new way of thinking. So that's what we were founded for about 70 years ago. And our role is how we see our role is to drive this change by actually providing solutions that could be helpful, by providing the innovation and showing the way forward towards a new model like this. We have a beautiful theory of change here. As once you dive into the impact sector, you will see more often. It's about defining what we do and why we do actually what we do. So for us, it's crucial to start at the system level. So everything we do starts at what is going on here in a specific area, in a specific market, and why is the system or value chain or market not working as we feel it should be from an inclusive and sustainable standpoint. So we look at root causes, leverage point, and stuff like that, and see where should innovation come to drive systemic change. So for us, it always starts with a top-down view on where's the innovation needed, and then the second part is a bottom-up approach to creating the solutions. So I really love the conversation also around at the plastic side. We're also working in Indonesia on plastic, Nitin, so I think we should connect there, even in conversation with Unilever here, because for us, we start at the end, right? So we start at the end, that is the consumer, that is, I think, it was your question too. For us, it starts at the consumer. How can we create models that are actually better for consumers or businesses from their perspective? Because I do not believe in pushing impact. I think in the end, it only works and it's only long lasting if there's a solution that's actually beneficial. So for us, our role is to be there at the customer and create models that could actually work. We build ventures on them with the intention to sort of prove a new model to the market and then inspire, invite, partner to grow it to scale. So we look for a direct impact of the ventures we build, but we also look for even higher indirect impact by showing the model to others. We showcase a lot. We don't have the intention to make money out of it. Our intention is to prove models and help others actually embed that model towards sort of a tipping point of a new economy. So for us, the role is very clear, but from the proving the model, it's all about involving a broad ecosystem actually in growing these models into scale. And for us, corporates like Unilever are crucial in the end because they are the market, and if we can help them, inspire them, invite them towards a new normal, then we have a job well done. So that means our very simple ecosystem is quite large. We are a small organization. We have 45 people working in 5 continents. No, sorry, 5 countries, 4 continents, which means that we always have to work intensively together within the ecosystem. Our main saying within Enviu is on the left: if you think you can do it alone, you're not dreaming big enough. So it's always about how can we grow coalitions, partnerships to bring the things we want to scale and create dreams instead of just nice initiatives. So that means we always start with some support from foundations, large global foundations that think that it's a good idea to pioneer towards new innovation. We work very closely together with communities, with experts, with local entrepreneurs to see how can we find solutions that can really work. We work, like I said, closely together with businesses to grow these solutions, to embed them in value chains, to bring them to scale. We work with governments to support, but also in the end to have the legislation that's needed to make the solutions work. And in the end, we have the quite large network of investors, because in the end, we build companies that should be investable and should grow towards a nice ROI on investment, but more important, a huge impact ROI on investment, creating a lot of stakeholder value across the value chain. So this is just some pics of our ecosystem. It's much wider than this, but it shows that we involve a lot of players, and that there are a lot of players in this market to grow this together. We, like I said, we work in 5 countries. Actually, this picture is outdated because we are closing Chile, and we have opened Malaysia. So still 5 is valid, but it's shifted a little bit. And our main focus, like I said, it is both social and environmental. We work in apparel and plastics, sustainable shipping, We work in food systems, especially in Africa, and in inclusion, so financial inclusion. And we take a sort of, like I say, market value chain approach, and seeing, like I said, what's going on and how can we solve this problem by creating companies. Which is all very conceptual, I know, sorry. So let's give me 2 examples. One example is one of our earlier ventures, founded in 2016. I'm taking you guys to Africa with my 2 examples. And this was actually, I think this concept even started in 2011 already, when we looked at what was going on in Africa and how there was a first discussion on financial inclusion, mostly about bankability and stuff like that. We thought, okay, but in the end, it's about stability. It's not only about bankability, it's not only about access to finance, but how can you create financial stability? I think the current crisis shows again that how difficult it is if you don't have a financial safety net to deal with all these kind of changes. And especially also for us, the intention was the long-term financial stability. Now we are Dutch, and if there's one thing we're very good at in the Netherlands, it's pensions. So we have a huge pension scheme here, as you probably all know. So our vision there was, how can we create a pension scheme for informal workers? There's none in Ghana, which are most of the workers in Ghana, by the way. How can you create a pension scheme, long-term saving for people that don't earn a lot of money? But still, it's a good thing to do, because saving provides stability, it provides a future, and it can really disrupt the system also economically, if there's a sort of stable financial pension scheme involved. But how do you do that when it's not there yet? So it took actually 5 years to even found the company, working together with the Ghanaian government, because there was no legislation. Informal workers were not allowed to. Then we tested and validated a lot of models to see what would work for someone. How can we really customize it to an informal worker? That means very small payments, very flexible, being able to withdraw if needed apart, being able to put money in every time you want, and not sort of things like that, completely different. We founded the company in 2016, and we're able to grow it now to around 50,000 savers. And I really love this company because in general, I think this is the way Africa and more developing countries will go. And it's necessary and it's crucial, and its impact is huge for the people saving and for the economy. On the other hand, I love it because it's extremely hard, because it requires so much change of the system, awareness, education. For investors, it's really hard because it's a long-term model. I mean, this is a business case in, let's say, 15 years. So please do find the investor that is okay with investing in something that will take 15 years, that has more stakeholder value than shareholder value. Luckily, we did find investors, but I completely admit, was also a question in the beginning, it is hard. But I think this is something we really would almost die for to make it work. And we're still running and going strong. But in the end, I believe this will be the future in Africa and multiple countries. So this is more on the inclusion, saving as a stability factor for bottom of the pyramid, and actually every informal worker in Africa. And the other example, completely different, is from our food program in Africa. That's in Kenya, actually, where we were looking at a sort of dysfunctional food value chain. And you probably all know that in Africa, there's not enough food, affordable food at the market. And the population is growing rapidly. So there's a big issue on the affordable, healthy food side. On the other side, on the producing side, most farmers live beneath poverty lines. And we have climate change. So that's a nice cocktail of a lot of things going wrong, because the climate change is really jeopardizing the land, and farmers don't have money or possibility to act on that actually. So the situation for a larger part of Africa is really not good, the outlook. So the question is, how can you disrupt a system like that? So we looked at it again from a business perspective, and there's one very interesting thing in the food chain, and that is waste. Well, waste is also an SDG category, right? So, but also waste is value. So from a business meets impact perspective, like Nitin said, so looking at both sides, actually waste is very interesting. So we focused on how can we prevent the waste in the value chain, which is around 50% for local food, and how can we bring that back, give that back to the value chain and to the actors in the value chain, especially the farmers. So I can speak for hours about it, very enthusiastic about it, but the main intervention that we're doing is setting up cold storages near the farm as a service, because farmers are not able to pay for it. So we set them up as a service, as a company, providing storage, cold storage, with what you create sort of leverage towards buyers, which there's no waste, we create market linkage, so creating stable income for farmers, earning enough to create a business out of it, but also offering more food to market. And with the growing income of the farmer, they will be in the end able to A, create a living, but also B, invest more in sort of the future of farming. So it's a quite an integral combination of looking at food to market, farmer income, but also building resilient farmer practices towards climate change. So again, if you want to know more, I can speak for hours about it, but I think this kind of interventions that we're looking for, how can we create stakeholder value, both social and environmental, by setting up new businesses that could really drive change in the value chain. So finally, I think my perspective in this large ecosystem is that there are good things going on, but as Nitin also said, we need leaders to accelerate this, because in my opinion, we are far from there. I think Unilever, from a consumer side, I see increasing awareness, but I think, Nitin, was your question also, if it is difficult to change your behavior just because it's good for the world. From a business perspective, I find it hard to believe that we can arrive at change when we don't have the right solutions for customers. So it's difficult to change behavior, and I think business is crucial in that. I love the story of Unilever. I think it's one of the front runners in this field, to be honest. Also be critical towards this market. I think most businesses are not there yet. There's a lot of, in the markets where we're active, there's still a lot of resistance to change models, because, and I understand, by the way, but it's difficult to change something that you already have been doing for hundreds of years, making your money out of, with shareholders sitting around the table, earning an ROI. It's not easy to change. And like I said, not all companies are that far as Unilever, and some are really not that far, and more challenging innovation instead of growing it. Now, being very frank. We do thankfully see a lot of social enterprises. The main challenge there is that let's say a lot of these social enterprises lack sort of the sustainable model of scalability. Most of them are a good idea, but will not fundamentally change things. So I always very happy that people are willing to spend their time, money, resources on these kind of things, but we need more scalable solutions here together with businesses if we really want to change. And finally, we already spoke about investment, and I'm glad to see much more money and a narrative going around in that field around sustainable investing. Although, again, I'm slightly critical here and there, because a lot of it is still the narrative, let's call it like that. So we're not investing in arms makers anymore, but there was just a conversation yesterday with our biggest pension scheme here, pension provider in the Netherlands. I think the Netherlands has about 800 billion euro in pension investment, and they really said we're still gonna invest in all kind of fossil companies because it's difficult to get out of them because we don't know what the ROI is on other things. So it's still very, very difficult conversation. We are taking steps as a world, but I think, like Nitin said, is we need the future generation. We need future leaders to step up and show the way, because change is always difficult. So I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be with you. So all my hope is on you. No pressure, but high expectations. No, just kidding. But I'm glad that these groups like this are stepping up to with the intention to make change, because I think we need it.
Thank you, Nitin. Questions for Michiel and Anirban? If you either raise your hand, Maria. Julia, I see you've got your hand up, so the floor is yours.
I was just clapping. Thank you very much for the presentation. Yeah.
Mandy, is that a question? Okay, Mandy, and then
yes.
Katya. Two questions.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for your presentation. Super interesting. Really appreciate it. I felt like one of the themes that was coming up a lot today was the idea of how challenging scalability is, and especially in regards to the base of the pyramid communities that Anirban was discussing. How do you, given that such a customized approach is required to gain trust in these communities and to respond to their specific needs, how do you view the potential of working across multiple base of the pyramid communities? Like, how do you view the way forward to scale that approach? Or what parts of it are more easily scalable than others? Or do we just kind of have to forget about scalability when we're working with such communities with such need? Thank you.
Mandy, would you want me to address that question?
That would be great. Thank you.
So there are a few ways of looking at this. The first learning is that the organization with the most resources and reach is almost always the government. So if you want to scale, you must partner with the government. Very often there are very good government programs already in place, and I'm talking about India. But helping those programs reach the people requires assistance. So that's one way of scaling. Second, which kind of a corporation can scale what kind of initiative? The program that I described to you about making water available so that agriculture productivity goes up and income goes up. What is the best organization to scale this? Now imagine you ran an organization that procured the produce of the farmers and then processed it for consumers. Let's say you procured wheat, you processed it for consumption by people like you and me. Now it would be in your interest to secure your supply chain. It would be in your interest to ensure that the farmers produce the best quality product and that the farmers have very high levels of productivity, because then you wouldn't go to many other places. So for you, there would be a business case to invest marketing dollars in this project and not just corporate social responsibility dollars, which are always very small. So depending on the nature of your business, there are things that you will be able to scale and there are things you won't be able to scale. As a last point, as a farming equipment manufacturer, we are working very hard to scale mechanization of agriculture. We're doing that because as a country develops, labor availability in farms goes down. Yet we have to increase productivity. So that is the area which we are trying to scale through our business. Those are the ways and caveats around scaling.
And can I add one thing from again more the consumer perspective? We spoke about the sachets, right? The pouches, and we're also working that in Indonesia from the perspective of the consumer again. So our focus has been on how can we replace these sachets by reusable materials. So it's good to collect and recycle, but in the end, it would even better to close the tap, right? So let's see if we can start at the beginning. So we are running an incentive scheme and new products actually by introducing refillable bottles at the store. And for us, the key thing there, your question was about scalability, but the key question is there, can we create a model that's actually beneficial for the consumer? And at this moment, it seems to work. So it's just a pilot, but consumers seem to be very happy because actually it's better to dose the small pilot. It's in the end, it's even cheaper because the pouches only have the impression of being cheap, right? But in the end, you spill a lot. It's so we seem to have a model that's actually beneficial for the consumer, more affordable for the consumer. The only question is, as Nitin was also raising, how can you create the right incentive for them to bring back the bottles? So we're at 70% now. So, but we want to go to 90 actually. But if we can make that work, then you have something that's interesting for both the FMCGs as sort of a pre-competitive model, right? So not only Unilever, but every one of them. And on the other hand, be beneficial to consumers. And then if we could make it work, then together with Unilever and other FMCGs, we can really bring that to scale with the government. It's crucial. I fully agree with that. It differs a bit with the country, but generally, you need to support perhaps a little bit of legislation to give it another push. But then we can really drive the system.
Let me just add a line. Michael, fantastic point. From an innovation perspective, my takeaway from Michael's intervention is change the solution if you want to scale. And in the past, in the innovation ecosystem, one way of scaling was miniaturize anything so you can access more people. I think from a sustainability perspective, there is a new possibility, which is make anything biodegradable. Packaging biodegradable, toothbrush biodegradable, make it biodegradable, you will scale.
Time for a last question. Joachim, you had your hand up.
Yes. Hi, good morning. Thank you so much, Michiel and Anirban. I guess a different kind of perspective. I was curious to know, like both of you work a lot with the local communities and with a lot of the people that are actually part of your interventions. And soon enough, our class is going to be going on a virtual field visit. So was curious to know any advice on how we can actually make the most out of the field visits, because of course it's virtual, but also wanted to know from your experiences, how can we make these field visits effective and meaningful as we start designing interventions with the respective projects that we're working on.
Michael, would you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think about it a little bit, but my main suggestion would be to ask questions. So come open-minded, try to be interested, try to understand how they work, how they live, where their needs are, because in the end, but then I'm repeating myself a little bit, I think in the end, a solution will only work if it will work for them. So ask questions, in life, by the way, in general, but also specifically for for this this reason.
So my input to that would be listen, observe, try and not put your own perspective when
Exactly.
you're listening to the people speak. They are coming to you from a completely different context, with completely different life experiences, with completely different hierarchy of needs. So just listen and try and see whether you can perceive what is important for them, or what is likely to work for them. I guess that should do. You will have Arun helping you out, and he's wonderful at all of this.
Yeah, I think you can also look online for suggestions there. So we work with human-centered design approaches, and there's a lot of that online. So I would suggest to dive into that. But then the idea is, like Anirban saying, is think about, let go of all your assumptions and focus on what actually they need, they want, they will be helped with, and design a solution from that.
Well, thank you very much. A big hand to all three speakers.